Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for Penn State's 2025 Workforce OD&C conference hosted by the Workforce Education and Development and Organization Development and Change program at the Pennsylvania State University. This is an event sponsored by Penn State College of Education, Penn State Office of Profits for Education Equity, and Penn State University Park Allocation Committee. My name is Halima Hatha. I'm a doctoral student in the Workforce Education and Development program at Penn State. I will be moderating today's session alongside with my colleagues, Dr. Jose, a PhD candidate in the Learning, Design, and Technology program at Penn State. We are excited to engage with you using the feature of the Zoom platform. At the end of this presentation, there will be a Q&A session. If you want to address your question, please type into the Q&A box. If you encounter any technical issues during the webinar, please let us know using the chat box. Our online Master of Operational Studies in Organization Development and Change is designed for professionals who want to gain the skills and knowledge necessary to lead organizational change effectively. Additionally, we offer a PhD program in workforce education and development with contractions in human resource development and organization development. Since 2021, we have established this biannual free conference featuring experts from around the globe. Today, we are excited to bring psychologists back into organizational change thinking and doing by Dr. Todd Matthews. Sociology has significant potential to enhance thinking and practice around organizational change. Yet the field is generally incurred in organizational change work. He seeks to remotely that by highlights several areas where sociology can enhance this work, particularly in this brave new world of AI and machine learning and doing. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Dr. Todd Matthews. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good day, everyone. Yes, you see the title of my presentation and my contact information here. I'll share that again at the end. So I want to thank you and also want to kind of give you a brief outline of what we're going to do here. I mentioned the description already, so I won't repeat that, but this is the description of our agenda for what we're going to do over the next 40 or so minutes. And then here's the agenda itself. Again, brief introduction, the objectives of the session, which I've modified slightly from what they were earlier, but still keeping in the same spirit, as you'll see in a moment. I will also talk about what I consider the promise of organizational change and organization development in what I'm now thinking of as a hyper-VUCA world. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. The limitations of existing organization change in OD, and I would say in many ways it's kind of re-entering sociology into that space, as I'll talk a little bit about. A little discussion of why sociological insights maybe have been largely ignored, and then some discussion of where we go from here, particularly in this brave new world of AI and machine learning and doing, and then some wrap-up thoughts, and as was mentioned, time for question and answer, which I'm very much looking forward to. So, a little bit about me. just a little bit here. As you can see, this image, this photo is one taken of me, I believe around age 3. So a pretty long time ago, a little bit more hair than now, better dressed probably than today. But you may be wondering, all right, why is he showing you this? Well, just to kind of contextualize a little bit, particularly since, again, my topic is about something that maybe is not as commonly discussed in the field. So this little guy asked a lot of questions when he was young. I had the nickname the Mouth of the South. I grew up in the South, and after a while, I started to, ask questions about the world and about social life and about things like difference and inequality and why things worked the way they did. So this little guy grew up and actually became a radio announcer for a while and started his collegiate career in communications, but then took some classes across the liberal arts. And I think liberal arts education is incredibly important. And certainly, as some have talked about, it's under attack today. So I'm very much a major supporter there, but what came out of that study was of different areas was my interest in sociology. So I pursued graduate degrees in that field, earned a PhD, worked for several years as a sociology professor, and then was tapped to move into administration, first as an assistant dean, and then as a department chair. And then ultimately, I went on to serve a couple of different universities in both the administrative role of department chair, but also program director of doctoral programs. First, an organization leadership program, and then an organization development and change program, PhD program that existed at Cabrini University just outside of Philadelphia. I worked there until it was clear Cabrini was not going to make it. And Cabrini was one of the institutions that closed in 2024, as we've kind of seen some shifts in the higher ed industry that I think are only continuing to move today. So I had the opportunity to move back to a sociology field, but also criminology, criminal justice, which are also fields that I've worked in. So I became a department chair at Sacred Heart University, where I am now, in 2023. And I had the good fortune of being able to bring the Cabrini Organization Development and Change students over to Sacred Heart to finish their dissertations. And there are currently several of them who are working on that. And we also have been fortunate enough to start a new PhD in Organization Development and Change at Sacred Heart University that has its first new cohort starting this year. And was able to bring along my colleague, Dr. Anton Shufutinsky, who I know was a keynote speaker yesterday in person at the conference. Fortunately, we were able to bring him along to be the founding program director and a faculty member for this program, along with myself and hopefully soon others. So all of this to be said, and all of this introduction, because I was once asked by a highly distinguished OD scholar practitioner shortly after I started at Cabrini, why I, as a trained sociologist, had moved into OD and what I thought I brought to the table based on that background. This question challenged me and led me on what I would say is currently an almost decade-long ongoing pursuit to understand what sociology can bring to OD and start to bring those elements into the field. So what I'll talk about today is a first attempt to publicly offer some comments on this. I've talked about this some in courses with students, but a broader public discussion, I think this is the first time I've had that opportunity. And I hope that what I have to say will help to contribute to OD's development and growth. OD and works around organizational change are critically important for us, and I think never more so than what we see today in the world to help facilitate organizational function and growth and development. I note this following up on Bill Rothwell's excellent presentation this morning, which noted the central challenge of OD is fostering cultural and social change. And I would add ongoing development and social stability as well within organizations and within kind of systems that exist at a variety of levels in our social world, particularly in the face of, again, these potentially global systemic changes now that we're seeing in addition to other factors as a result of artificial intelligence, and which we're starting to face in our organizations and higher ed. Certainly, I know this is there's enormous discussion and enormous anxiety, concern, and also excitement about the potential of AI. There are a variety of perspectives, and as a result, a wide range of ways in which people are starting to address this. But we are very early in that process, and a lot that we do not know at this point. So I should note for myself specifically, I've largely avoided using AI like ChatGPT or other tools that I know are being commonly used by my students, my colleagues, even my spouse. My wife just the other day wrote up a description of herself and asked ChatGPT to do this for her as a viable candidate for president of the United States, and it gave an incredibly nice summary that made me want to vote for her. But in preparing this talk, I asked Gemini AI, so I work in the Google platform quite a bit, and Gemini is Google's AI assistant. I said, please find me a visual image of myself, and I included my name, Todd L. Matthews, operating in an AI world. So that's all I asked for, and that's what you see here. About 15 to 20 seconds later, this is what came up. So you see this image. I don't look like this individual whatsoever, but I was pleased to see them. They thought made me look nice, even a little bit like University of Tennessee alum Peyton Manning, who I went to that school for my master's degree. So I saw that and was happy. But I saw this image and was fascinated by it because it's showing the AI world here as I think many of us understand it. And kind of the idea of operating in this world with a drone flying overhead, and again connecting to machines to learn about what's existing, to tap into a lot of knowledge and be able to develop. So I found this to be just a fascinating little image that I saw. So I want to do some introductory poll questions to get us started. And I have a few here, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the first question now, if I could. There we go. Thank you. I have 4 questions, actually. And the first one is, how optimistic are you feeling about the state of the world over the next 5 to 10 years? And this, you can think about this in whatever way you choose, but how optimistic are you feeling? From completely optimistic, somewhat optimistic, neutral, unsure, somewhat pessimistic, or completely pessimistic. Second question, what aspects of human society are most responsible for your answer to the previous question, however you're feeling? So if you're completely optimistic, completely pessimistic, or somewhere in between, which single aspect, and again, I know that's difficult, but still, let's focus on one there. Economy, politics, social life, culture, media, that can be traditional and social, media, environment, science, and technology. Third, being a student or practitioner of organizational and social change, which I know many of you in the room are, probably most, how confident are you that existing disciplinary models of practice are able to meet the challenges of the next 5 to 10 years in your organizational and social worlds? And I ask that you rate your confidence as a percentage from 0 to 100 and gave some categories here between 0 or 1 to 25%, 26 to 50, 51 to 75, 76 to 99, or 100%. And then finally, what emotional adjective first comes to your mind when you think of how artificial intelligence will factor into these next few years? Happy, sad, angry, fearful, calm, excited, confused, hopeful, surprised, or frustrated. So we can just take a moment here and allow individuals to answer those questions. That would be wonderful. Thank you. Not sure how results are feeding in, but I would assume the team will put up our results here in just a moment when.
Yeah, we have so far 70% of participation. You just tell me when you want to end the poll, and I will show the results, Dr. Matis.
Sounds good. We can give it another 30 seconds or so. That's
Okay.
great.
Okay. Okay, 70% of participation. So I will close it now. Will it be okay?
Thank you.
And the results are being shared with everyone.
All right. Thank you very much. Oh, this is good. All right. Thank you. Thank you everyone for participating. It tells us I did not answer. I wasn't allowed to, so that's okay. Completely optimistic, small number. Certainly we see a wide range here, but generally speaking, again, a lot of folks are pessimistic about the state of the world over the next several years. I think that aligns with a lot of survey work that we see in other arenas. And certainly, I think as we get to the next slide or the next answer, it will probably illuminate some of the reasons why folks felt that way.
So to see the next question, you need to scroll down.
Yes, I've got it.
and
Thank you. So as we see here, politics, not at all surprising given the volume of news that we see that's centered around politics right now, like economy, social life, culture, media. Interesting that no one answered environment. I teach on environment and society quite a bit. Certainly climate change is a topic that's of important interest to me. Science and technology, a couple there as well. So very interesting, not surprising. I think I cannot, of course, equate the two necessarily here to where people landed. Some of who said they were completely or somewhat optimistic may have answered our major categories like politics and culture, but not sure. So maybe we'll see some of that when we get to the discussion in a few moments. Being a student or practitioner of organizational social change, how confident are you existing models are able to meet these challenges? Interesting that a majority felt that their confidence is pretty low, 26 to 50% kind of range there in terms of confidence. Then 51 to 75%. Is the next largest category. So a little more confident there that the models will be able to meet these challenges. And then a few who have what I would characterize as a pretty high level or complete confidence, absolutely, in that, which is certainly encouraging for those of us in the field, in the space. So finally, then, thinking about this from the standpoint of emotions, the emotional adjective that comes to mind. We see one for happy, and we see quite a few for hopeful, hopeful being the largest single category, and then fearful, excited, surprised, frustrated, calm. Interesting kind of range of emotions here, a lot of positives, which maybe doesn't necessarily correlate to some of the previous questions there, which I think is in and of itself interesting and an important insight as well. And certainly, as we talk here in the next few minutes, we'll see some of these areas where we need to think maybe a little bit more about emotion or other sorts of so-called rational factors. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. Thank everyone for that, to just, again, get us thinking here. All right, so let me get back to the next slide. Again, our session objectives, 3 primary objectives that for this time we have together. 1, to discuss the promise and shortcomings of contemporary organization change, development, research, and practice for today's world. 2nd is to understand the role sociological concepts. Some, certainly, I'm just drawing on a couple because of time, and perspectives can play in enhancing organization change theory and practice. And start to think at least a little bit about some potential scenarios for organizational and social change, again, in this emerging AI-influenced brave new world of work and society. So I want to start us off kind of where the overall sentiment was in the last of the final questions, which was kind of a positive view, a lot of positive emotional states being expressed there. And I think it's very important for us to start in that space and start with the promise of organization change and OD in a hyper VUCA world. This is a time, I would argue, where we need strong theory and practice to support organizations, social institutions, more than ever. VUCA, as we've understood it over the past several decades, and certainly I would say over the last 15 years, as it's become a predominant concept in our field, is incredibly important. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, all critically present, and in many cases, very dominant in our lives. But I would argue increasingly it doesn't describe the pace or scale of our changes. And that's why I think we're now in a hyper VUCA world. So we see that acceleration and kind of multiplication or in exponential growth due to the pace and scale of again, world-altering changes in some of those areas that we highlighted a moment ago: politics, economics, culture, and again, really all aspects of our world. The image on the right is a reflection of what I think is the most fearful cataclysm for many, which is the simultaneous hurricane, tornado, earthquake, and volcanic eruption. And I would ask us to think, is this the level of change that we face? Do we face a world where we're seeing the simultaneity of again, life-changing events, life-changing and world-changing activities, and again, events and policies and practices going on? Maybe it doesn't quite rise to the level of this sort of simultaneous cataclysm, but many do believe that is the case. And more importantly, I would argue, fear that this is the case. So I should note that when we think about organizations, you know, the models of organizations that we often think about are just don't handle the complexity. So many organizations look really more like this, just endless kinds of connections and nodes and feedback loops and processes. And Professor Rothwell earlier today, you know, when he mentioned OD, I think this is quite helpful here for understanding this, you know, understanding this type of organization, the systematic process for applying behavioral science principles and practices in organizations to increase individual and organizational effectiveness. In my notes, I underlined and bolded behavioral science because I should note that the social sciences and behavioral sciences overlap, but they certainly are not one and the same. And as a result, I think that, you know, this is kind of the first point that I would like to make here, is that, again, we've relied largely on some of these behavioral science principles, which are incredibly valuable, but which are maybe not necessarily up to the task of addressing some elements of this sort of organizational life, particularly as we start to think about the social and relational elements, which are so fundamental in many of these nodes that we see in this model. And that's without, of course, considering external factors that are incredibly powerful and important and impact organizations today. So, you know, when we look at the world and we think about the complexity of our world today, within our organizations, certainly they're very complex. And we know there are lots of different models that describe how they operate. And, you know, many of them are ones that we're very familiar with, you know, from McKinsey's 7S's, Wiseboard's work. My colleague, Anton Shufutinsky and Dave Jamison's work around strategic OD and different sorts of models that exist do capture some of this, certainly. But then in practice, how well do we actually do? How much attention do we actually pay to these external factors when working within organizations? Or is our central attention focused on the internal locus within the organization itself primarily? Certainly of fundamental importance, without question, but are we missing opportunities to attack and address, or at least face the political, economic, legal, environmental, sociocultural, technological factors that also are very important in our world today. So I should note, this slide says the limitations, but I should first note that I chose to come into OD because I felt some frustrations with sociology as a field, particularly around practice. And so I really saw a lot of possibility and excitement in organization development. As I mentioned earlier, I was running an organizational leadership doctoral program and quickly came to recognize some of the limitations of leadership-centered models, as we'll see in just a moment, and really saw the promise of OD as, again, really being able to impact organizations. And my interest in sociology had always been operating primarily at an organizational or kind of social organizational level, whether that was, again, specific organizations that were a part of like workplaces or, universities or nonprofit groups or whatever that may be, or kind of socio-political organization, what we sometimes call kind of social ecological organization along, jurisdictional lines, et cetera. Without question, again, I do not want you to take away that I'm saying that we don't theorize this complexity. We absolutely do. And we absolutely understand the importance of external factors. However, once we get down to it, most of the emphasis of actual practice, and I would argue a lot of what we see in published research seems to minimize these areas, or at least struggles to find tangible ways to address them. And I think that's important there. Like any model in existence, OD is powerful and it provides a relevant approach to developing and sustaining organizations, but it also has limitations and blind spots. Again, remember, like we noted on the previous slide, it's explicitly focused on behavioral science, which fundamentally is talking about psychology, economics, and management. And certainly as we look at kind of the history and lineage, much of what we draw upon and much of what we define as our history of OD draws upon those disciplines. Psychology, particularly humanistic psychology, and especially early on in our founding and kind of baked in some ways, but then I would argue particularly over the last 30 to 50 years, the predominance of kind of management thinking and economics, all important, but leaving out or minimizing the social, political, and cultural. Now, as you think about the potential impacts of AI, which is what this overall meeting is about, we have to consider and think about whether the social, political, and cultural aspects of organizations and of organizational life will become more or less important to us as AI increases in usage and importance. I think that's a very important question for us to consider at this stage. And then, of course, there are just some key concepts that are emphasized directly in sociology and other social sciences. When I say sociology, I'm talking about the social sciences broadly. And some of them would be power and authority, interest, and culture more broadly understood, I would argue. So let's move into some of that discussion here. First, I would note to you, any of you who took an introduction to sociology course are probably very familiar with the sociologist Max Weber, German sociologist widely considered the father of sociology, early 20th century. If you have not studied any sociology, you probably have heard about him indirectly around his work on bureaucracy, which is well known in some OD circles, especially in the SEAM perspective and the TFW virus. The W there refers to Weber, though interestingly, unlike Taylor, who was promoting those aspects of the virus in scientific management, Weber was not necessarily promoting bureaucracy without noting some limitations, but that's beyond the ability to really talk about today and the time we have available. So what I would note here, though, is what you see is his trifold look at authority. And when we think about this broad model of authority and power that he developed, it's a conceptual framework that I think we need to consider in our OD work. We have so much reliance and assumption that we're only operating within the rightmost category, which is the legal rational framework. And I would argue it's kind of a baked-in assumption in OD, in our thinking and our practice, that we're largely going to be working with systems and leaders in particular who, again, are operating in an organizational framework as in those positions of authority, not focused on their charisma, or again, kind of custom. But I would argue that if we are being honest and thinking about the elements of authority that we are seeing exhibited today in many realms, we have to understand authority and leadership more broadly in organizations than we do, as more than simply, again, legal, rational, bureaucratic, following norms and traditions. I think that's critically important, and again, something that I think we have not really come to terms with effectively necessarily in OD yet. We see some examples here of I would argue, some charismatic leaders. The Wolf on Wall Street, on the left, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, Mahatma Gandhi there on the right. There are certainly others I didn't want to show who maybe provide more negative characterizations that you could think of today. But, we have a variety of charismatic leaders throughout our history and today. And many entrepreneurs are charismatic leaders who inspire their followers, their workers. And again, obviously, many politicians are as well. I often watch Shark Tank on Friday nights with my wife. And certainly when we see the entrepreneurs who come into the tank, quite often they're highly charismatic. And that's a major part of, that's a big part of their appeal. And indeed, within their organizations, that becomes a big part of their appeal as well. And yet, in OD and in many of the behavioral sciences and management, we tend to focus on the rational leader, the bureaucrat, the more bureaucratically focused leader, and that is something that I would argue we have to problematize in our organizations, and indeed in how we work with leaders and work within the organizations as well. Also, certainly something else that is of fundamental centrality and somewhat related to the previous point, but also kind of taking us a little deeper, is the kind of the model of economic man, or Homo economicus, the totally rational individual who has static preferences and maximizes utility as a consumer and profit as a producer. This is a model that we assume in our interactions and in many of our many of our OD efforts, many of our practice efforts. We assume that individuals are going to act rationally, which certainly is not often the case in human behavior. And certainly behavioral economists have demonstrated that in recent years. Kahneman, Tversky, many others have very effectively demonstrated that we act in many more complex ways than simply the rational actor model. And I would argue that this is a bug of modernity writ large, this assumption. Particularly powerful assumption in OD. Again, if we can just get people to move in the direction of their rational interests within organizations, then we'll be good in our work. If we can just get them to support the goals of the organization, particularly its ultimate goal, which is its continued survival and growth. Humans, though, quite often act on the basis of emotion or response to non-rational factors, and that's incredibly important for us to always remember. Certainly, we, as we think about organizations, and I teach in doctoral program on corporate social responsibility, and have this discussion about CSR, and certainly, as we know, many frame this as a debate against our modern values, and many of our values of OD as kind of a humanistic approach. Frame it in response to this image that you see here, Milton Friedman's emphasis on the social responsibility of business being to increase profits, the bottom line, still taken for granted in many of our efforts of organizational change and development. I see this very often in the higher ed world in work that I do with my colleagues and work in other university settings and higher ed settings, particularly in the Catholic higher ed space where many of our doctoral programs are located. There's this discussion of no mission without margin. And again, I have students often who come in and talk about how so much of what we do and so many of the social and humanistic values are wonderful, but at the end of the day, it's the bottom line, which contrasts with OD's humanistic values again, and much of what we've seen to broaden the quote bottom line. You know, we talk about triple bottom line, ESG. But of course, as we recognize, these are under attack today, and even being attacked legally in some circles. And then, of course, there's a critique of these efforts being simply greenwashing or, you know, good kind of social good washing to not be genuine in terms of their efforts. So this idea of this bottom line is something that I think is very powerful in a lot of what we do as far as trying to organize, you know, trying to work within the organization. But for many reasons, the complexity is much more significant. We tend to assume or hope, again, that leadership in organizations is benign or even supportive of our humanistic OD values. Some believe organizations are moving in that direction, and you know, again, in a direction of these more humanistic values over the past decade, as we saw, certainly, and we have seen things like the movement to promote diversity, equity, and inclusivity in organizations. But again, of course, there's a significant backlash or counter trend that is emerging today. One of the things I do on my long drive to campus is listen to podcasts. So there was a New York Times podcast called Matter of Opinion, and recently Mark Andreessen, a well-known CEO, was interviewed, and in this interview kind of characterized what I would describe as the emerging revolt of the elites. And in this, he made a quote and said, very clearly, companies have basically been hijacked to engines of social change and social revolution. He said the employee base was going, quote, feral. There were cases in the Trump era, the first administration, where multiple companies that he knew felt like they were hours away from full-blown violent riots on their own campuses by their own employees. And Andreessen and many other CEOs said that their response to this was, you know, again, to move rightward politically, but also in terms of trying to reassert leadership and power within their organizations. And some of them even said that this was the case because they just want employees to do what they say because they know best, ultimately, at the end of the day. Clearly, this does not reflect all leaders' viewpoints or practices, but I think it's certainly something significant to note in the context of today, particularly since many CEOs and leaders who present these views are actually ones who are working in the industries where AI is being developed. So I think it's important to recognize this as well and to force us to think more broadly about what leadership means in this context. Now, we know certainly that purpose and mission are important elements of culture, and certainly in OD, I think we do a great job of talking about this non-bottom line factor of purpose for motivating action in organizations. But I would say it's still largely conceived of in rational terms. It's, again, a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. It's a means to an end, which is the productivity or success of the organization and the individuals within it. Certainly relevant, but we cannot say it's the entire story that we see. Edgar Schein has noted that, you know, culture is certainly here and important, but it's much more than just espoused values like we saw in the last slide. So when we think about his brilliant work on organizational culture, which I would argue is certainly in keeping with both behavioral and social science, culture is more than espoused values, even though we do tend to focus a lot of attention on those espoused values. Building organizational culture involves operation at all of these levels here. And I'd ask us again to think about how we're doing across these levels. Particularly quite often am asking people, as I ask myself, to challenge my own basic assumptions and challenge our own basic assumptions, which are the ultimate source of our values and actions. And I think that's an important thing for us to do. And again, I would also note that over-reliance on the idea of shared purpose, identity, and vision may be overcome by interest and organizational factors like siloing or legalistic focus within organizations. Again, kind of going back to that bureaucratic emphasis, certainly, but that idea that organizations today are highly siloed, and as a result, very difficult to kind of bring that vision and shared identity together. And then also organizations are very fearful. These issues are huge in higher ed right now in my industry. So there's an enormous amount of risk aversion. You can see what's happening right now as many individual universities and entire systems are being challenged by the presidential administration on a wide variety of areas, and are trying to avoid any sort of response other than, generally speaking, capitulation due to, again, organizational fears related to their survival. So I've kind of run through my time here pretty quickly, so I'm going to highlight these last couple of points very quickly for us. These get us thinking about some of the concepts from sociology and the related social sciences that I think are important. So Carl Polanyi, a famous mid-20th century social scientist, talked about economic relations being embedded in social relations. And I think that's very important for us, again, to remember. Pierre Bourdieu similarly talked about different forms of capital in his work Distinction and several other works. And I think that, we do a pretty good job of looking at economic capital, but not so much when we think about cultural, social, and symbolic capital within organizations and how that impacts individuals and organizations more broadly. And then most significantly, as we move forward here, I would argue for some work that connects to where my interest as a scholar and practitioner is focused and intersects, and that's promoting the development and maintenance of social capital within organizations as well as society writ large. This is an effort to foster individual agency, but also to reinvigorate civic life. So for those of you who are familiar with Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America and work that's been done over the last couple of centuries, the idea there is that the centrality of associational life and the social relations that are formed, or what we call social capital, is the distinctive feature of our American experiment in Republican democracy. And for Putnam, Robert Putnam, the recently retired Harvard political scientist, he noted that this was embedded in things like networks, trust, and reciprocity. We talk about trust a lot in OD, but I would argue that we don't really measure it to the extent that we should, and focus on not just trust, but these other elements of social capital as well, and how they are critical elements in engaging individuals and, again, collectives, teams, in participating in our organizations more effectively to promote change. So if you think about that image from earlier of all of those different nodes within the organization, what I would argue here is without strong social capital within our organizations, those nodes are going to be operating often at cross purposes, and as a result, making it much, much more difficult for us to be effective in our work. So certainly something we talk a lot about in OD is fostering genuine dialogue and also promoting what I would call efficacious democratic participation. And to summarize this point, it requires high levels of social capital. And up to this point, I think we probably have not done as effective as a job as we should in trying to develop this element of what we're doing in OD. So why have these insights been ignored? For time purposes, I'm going to skip over this. Like I said, this is work in progress. More than happy to share this with individuals or to discuss this further. I'm going to be working on a manuscript this summer to hopefully get something out to really kind of lay this out in more depth. But again, I've highlighted some elements like the emphasis on humanistic psychology and management. Again, the behavioral science side and to the minimization of the social science elements, which are actually prevalent in early OD. Kurt Lewin did quite a bit of work around sociology as well. And you can go look at some of his early work being published in sociology journals. And you can also see action research being promoted within sociology and the social sciences as well, though I would argue not nearly as effectively or in as widespread of a manner as it should have been for reasons which I won't go into here. But again, there is actually more of a history of connection than I think we recognize. So then finally, very quickly, where are we at today? And where do we think of this as far as AI? Well, we know that often people talk about the 4 industrial revolutions, but I think we can certainly recognize that we perhaps are in a 5th industrial revolution era today. Industry 5.0 with our AI emergence, certainly. As without question, this is accelerating, and I think this is a timeline that's making it more and more difficult for us to manage change and to deal with change in our societies because of this rapid acceleration. So which future do we want? Do we want the future of the Skynet AI, the one that ultimately comes to control us? Apologies, I have a train going by. I was hoping we'd be able to avoid that. But is that the future we want, the Skynet AI? Or are we hoping maybe to, again, draw on AI to help us support integration within existing systems, developing new systems? Because there are many values to AI, many kinds of positive aspects that perhaps we can talk about in the discussion, because I know, again, my time is running out here. So rapidly, in conclusion, I would argue there's many challenges facing us, but we do have a great opportunity as well. Change is occurring. It's always occurring. We're in a moment of big, maybe even tremendous change across societies, institutions, organizations, and our own life worlds as well. There are many other sociological insights I didn't draw upon today, but certainly I wanted to highlight a couple. OD and organization change are amazing fields that contribute so much to organizations, but I would be remiss if I didn't say I think sociology and other social sciences, there are insights that we can draw upon to enhance their efficacy, particularly today, given how changes are manifesting. And I think even more so as AI becomes a powerful technology that can lead us down many different paths, some quite positive, or maybe others that could be really damaging to humanity as we know it. So let's be strategic and leverage AI now for humanizing organizations and not moving down the Skynet path. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I want to thank the conference team, particularly Jose, Hale, James, the whole team that's involved there, who make the events like this possible. And I want to thank all my past and present mentors, colleagues, friends, family, who've made today possible with their support, encouragement, and guidance over the years. So I guess I'll turn it over for the questions or comments from the discussion, the chat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Todd Matthews, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So we have some questions in the chat. The first one, from the sociology viewpoint, have you looked at holistic, socially and agile, or combining all three in organization design? AI works well in all three. I am rephrasing managed teams.
So certainly there is some work in those areas. Again, I think this is very much a new field, and some of the work around the teams that are developing the self-management, those aspects, kind of the economic sociology, organizational sociology has done a little bit there. I think certainly when we start to think about how those teams operate, I would still go back to the insights around social capital. And I would argue that, yes, those teams, as they self-organize, as they come together, Hopefully we'll be building up those elements as well as just kind of the more technical or technocratic sides of kind of coming together as teams. So there's certainly some potential there. It's a topic I think that's worth exploring some more. But I would argue certainly that without, again, strong social bonds, trust, particularly reciprocity, some of the elements that Putnam talks about, that those teams will struggle. And I think we've seen some of that already. So now you have others, please.
Thank you. We have another question. Would you say organizational system design system, not just information system, is a subcategory of organizational development, or is that a separate territory?
You said organizational system design specifically?
Yeah, organizational system design, and they emphasize it as system, not just information system.
I mean, I think it's part of the overall piece of organization, OD and OD and change. Certainly, I think system design is a critically important element. It's a challenging one, certainly, and in many ways it challenges us, I think, even at ideological levels, because there is a strong emphasis, kind of a strong anti-planning emphasis in many ways, and the system design has those elements of planning involved within them. So I think there are those elements that we have to consider as well, but I would absolutely consider it to be part of this overall framework. Absolutely.
Thank you. And could you please, Dr. Todd, move to the next slide?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Sorry.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So on behalf of Workforce Education and Development OD&C conference organizers, we hope you enjoyed today's session. If we didn't answer your questions, please feel free to email us or contact the presenters directly. We would love to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take a moment to complete the survey using the link in the chat box. We have more sessions for you today. Check the conference website using the link in the chat box. Also, we are delighted to extend a special invitation to all of you for the Workforce Education and Development OD&C Professional Development Network webinars series. Since 2020, we have been offering free monthly webinars with extraordinary speakers. You will find more information in our website. Please find the link in the chat. Remember, registration for all our events is completely free and can be found on our website. We want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to join us. You can also stay updated by following us on our social media platforms, including Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope to see you soon and have a great rest of your day, and see you in the next session. Thank you.